In this Studio 5 special, we're going heart to heart with the singers and songwriters behind our favorite anthems of worship. And welcome to this Studio 5 special. We're sitting down for an extended conversation with some of our favorite worship leaders and counting down some of our favorite worship tunes. Here are your first two. At number 5.
Where would I be if you let me, God? Where would I be? Lift it up now. If you let me, I don't wanna know. Where would I be? I don't wanna know. If you let me, I'll never know. Where would I be? If you let me, but you
At number 4. There are 3 more worship tunes to come in this special countdown. Right now, though, it is time to begin the first of our 3 interviews with some of our favorite worship leaders. Barret helped to write Good, Good Father. He's also known for House Fires. But after all these years of singing and songwriting, he's doing something new and striking out on a solo career. Barret is the first of our 3 interviews in this week's Studio 5 special. Helped to write Good, Good Father. Chris Tomlin records it, and you are helping him to launch an imprint of a record label, you being right. Releasing your first solo project.
I would have never put those together. Like, you look back and you're like, wow, I see the moving of like God opening doors and you walking through them, but at the time it doesn't always, you're just like, what is happening? Like you're doing your best with you're trusting God for what's next, but you also don't know what's going to happen. Right. It could have gone a million different ways and would have still been amazing. But now to look back, and I mean, Good, Good Father really was the beginning of a relationship with Chris that would be releasing an album. And for me, Chris has been such an influential voice in my life, even from afar at times, as a songwriter, but also a worship leader and just someone I've really looked up to sort of have him help guide me along in these next steps is like, it's amazing.
How does it feel? We've got the EP and albums coming. Was this something you always wanted to do? Or?
No, I have always done music. I've put out records and songs, but to do something that you're so used to doing in a new way feels brand new.
Every battle, through every heartbreak, through every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress.
It was never a thought in my mind like, oh, I'll do this, and then someday I'll do my own record. It's actually my wife, Meg, who she told me, she was like, babe, I think you need to think about doing a solo record. You have all these songs that you write that don't necessarily have the right outlet for it, and I think you would experience a lot of life sharing some of these things that you care so much about and you haven't. And at the time I was like, no, I'm not, no way. And then the next morning I remember like the thought like stayed. It survived the night is the way I say it. Like, you know, you have like a bad idea that like does not survive the 24-hour testing period. And then over the next few months, like the more I'd think about it and, you know, the what if of it, it started to unfold where it was like a bad idea for my wife that I didn't want to think about to like, I actually was like, wow, what if I did that? And then I wanted to, and then I was like, I have to. You just feel like the family support and also the new nerves of like, I'm about to do something new again. You don't have to do it, you know, but there was that, I don't know, the excitement of sharing something that's so meaningful has always been like a driver for me, I guess.
What can you tell us about the project that we haven't already heard?
There's 50 to 55 songs that were like written throughout. The question I kept asking myself was, what songs feel like right now? What feel like now songs that feel really important, not only for me, but it's just that could be offered as a help. And you don't know how songs are going to be received, but you know, like that, I've been really following that feeling. What songs feel like if I don't put these out now, it'll be a miss.
Full album drops in July. You hitting the road yourself?
There will be more dates to come. Yeah. And I think that's one of the exciting things now. Like, there's not many times in life where you get to start a new thing in the same, field, but with all the experience that you've had as well. And in a lot of ways, like this, this expression of music feels like, I feel like I'm dreaming again. I feel like I'm 18 and you can, you know what I mean? You don't know what it's gonna look like a year from now. And we feel that as a family, Meg and I and the kids, we feel the faith aspect of it that you should feel all along, and you do feel, but there's something about change and the mystery of it. We definitely feel that right now. So I'm as excited to figure out what it is as anybody else, I guess. Like we're going one step at a time, but I know that we really feel more than anything, we just feel like the yes and what's next.
I have tasted and I have seen that you are better than all these things. Yeah, you are better than all these things.
Once again, Pat is the first to sign with Chris Tomlin's label, and we caught up with him while he was on tour with Tomlin on the Night of Worship tour. Still ahead in this Studio 5 special, she's a founding member of Jesus Culture. And one of the strongest voices in worship music. Kim Walker-Smith opens up about death, loss, and depression. And welcome back to the Studio 5 special. Kim Walker-Smith is our next worship leader, but before we get to her, here are the next two tunes in our look at some of our favorite worship songs. At number 3. Number 2. And we have just one more worship song to share. As you wait for that, Kim Walker-Smith is one of the strongest voices in worship music. She's one of the founding members of Jesus Culture. But as we sit down with the mother of 3, 4 years have passed since her last solo project. She's sharing life lessons, life pains, and life's ultimate hope. You have a relatively new album out right now, your first in 4 years solo. Wow. How does this differ from the last 4 years ago? What's life been?
Well, so on my side, that record, I decided to do it in the studio, where I have always done live recordings. Yes.
That's what we used to.
Yeah, and I wanted to do something different because I wanted to tell a different story of what God had done in my life in the last 4 years. And the last 4 years were probably some of the hardest I've walked through, with the death of my dad, and I had postpartum depression really bad after I had my second child. And I learned a lot in that season with the Lord. And as hard as it was a really good season that was full of a lot of hope and a lot of just coming to the place of understanding that He's with me even in the mess and the hard times. And I wanted to be able to really capture that message and communicate it in a different way. So I did something I hadn't done before, which is going to the studio. So.
I enjoy the fact that you're talking and talk about dealing with depression. Yeah. To hear the church, a worship leader, how important is it? Because people will often say, oh, just pray it away, or, you know, it's not, we don't take it so seriously sometimes.
Yeah, it is really important to talk about it. And I think, first of all, it helps to hear other people talk about it, because then you understand I'm not alone in it. Because that's probably one of the first lies that the enemy would bring when you're in depression, is that you're isolated, that you're alone. It kind of makes the depression seem even worse and even bigger, because you feel that you're alone in it. So to hear someone else say, yeah, I have felt that way, or I've struggled with that, or I feel that right now, it's the kind of first glimmer of hope that, okay, I'm not alone in this. But also, I think that it's really important to talk about, because there is multiple, facets to that. There's the spiritual side, where yes, the enemy does come to steal, kill, and destroy, as the word says. But there's also the other side of there's things that can help, like exercise and nutrition and talking to someone. All of these things that are just as important.
How has having children changed your approach to worship?
I have 2 boys. I just this last year, I had baby number 3, a little girl. And, the first thing I noticed after my boys was that I could see a new perspective of how the Father loves us. And it's also been interesting for me to see kind of the difference in my relationship with God, having little boys and then having a little girl, and how that just changed my heart in a new way. I've loved that. My son just a few months ago asked Jesus into his heart for the first time, which was so exciting. But he's understanding now what it's all about and the importance, and he's understanding that worship, it's not just singing, but that mommy is helping people connect to Jesus. And that is actually really thrilling to see him making those connections. And he also understands that there's a purpose when mommy has to go away for a little bit of a time, and he gets happy about that, because he understands what's going on.
And it is a busy time ahead for Kim, with plans for South Africa, touring solo, leading worship at home, not to mention being a wife and mother of 3.
Up next in Studio 5.
Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough.
Matt Maher is hearing echoes and encouraging listeners to make room for what matters.
And welcome back to Studio 5. We have made it to the final tune in our look at some of our favorite worship tunes. Take a look and a listen.
At number 1.
I see the world in grace. I see the world in gospel. I see the world your way. And I'm walking in the light. I'm walking in the wonder. Jesus, you're the wonder in the wild. So it wasn't this to wonder. Oh, I
That's the final tune, but there is an endless sea of worship music we could share, and a good number of those tunes come from Canadian contemporary Christian music artist and songwriter, as well as a worship leader, Matt Maher. Take a listen as we continue our Studio 5 Worship Leader Special.
You are my joy, you are my song, you are the well, the one I'm drawing from.
Originally, the album was going to be an album exploring the nature of protest.
My whole life long, where else would I go?
It was sort of asking the question of how do we testify in this day and age, in the time in which we find ourselves.
Your love defends me, your love defends me.
I started to think about how we live in a day and an age where we echo things that we hear. And it's funny because it's how we learn to communicate as children. My kids learn how to talk by repeating the things that I say. They don't just repeat the words, they repeat my attitudes, they repeat my worldview. So if there's pain in my heart that's unresolved, if there's bitterness, if there's resentment, like, it's a crazy thing to think that my kids can pick up on that and they can echo that into the world. And it's kind of the same way now with social media. You know, a lot of times people say things and it somehow captures something that we feel. And so rather than digesting it and really considering what does this mean, we just sort of throw it back into the world saying, yeah, this is how I feel. And so, and then it's like, but then we're on these social networks where we're typically just hanging out with people that think the same way as us and talk the same way, and so it's like we're in a giant echo chamber. So the word echo just kept coming back to me because that's how we learn to communicate, and that's how we communicate more and more these days. And I felt like it's a great time for me to consider, stop and think about, how do I choose to communicate things that matter into the world?
We're formed by the things that we hear, and from an early age we learn how to communicate with the world by repeating things that we've heard. How do we pass down to generations this thought of, as Christians, we're supposed to be really mindful of how we choose to respond to things? So much of faith is about doing that. So much of faith is about learning to pass on faith.
We started making the record in January, and in March my dad got really sick, and I had to fly back to Newfoundland where I grew up to be with him.
In the face of suffering, I think if there's a group of people who are supposed to be repeating things that bring hope and bring the possibility of a different way forward, I think the people of God are the ones who are supposed to do that.
There was a group of songs that were inspired by old hymns. You know, my mom's side is American, my dad's side's Canadian. My dad's side was all like Irish Catholic, and my mom's side was more just kind of American, different iterations of Protestantism. But my grandmother, my mom's mother, was Baptist. So I started rediscovering all these old Baptist hymns because I never grew up singing them. And so many of them were written out of a place of suffering.
The older you get, the more important this becomes. I think about this all the time, even just as a parent and as a father. How am I modeling to my kids how I want them to respond?
That, I think, it helped me contextualize my own grief with losing my dad. It just sort of, I've always felt, coming out of the context of being Catholic, I've always had this understanding that we're tethered to a story that is a much bigger story that we're part of. And the lives of those who've gone before us stand as a witness and as a testimony to the God that we come to know and love through the scriptures.
I hear the echo, I hear the echo, follow the echo, echo.
At least 3 of Matt's albums have reached the top 25 Christian albums on the Billboard chart, and at least 4 of his singles have reached the top 25 Christian songs chart.
Still to come in Studio 5.
You're God of the hills and valleys, hills and valleys.
Torrin Wells rides the waves of hills and valleys, finds life's rhythm, and is here to show us how.
And welcome back to Studio 5. We are almost out of time for this special episode of Studio 5. Please know that even as we speak, we are hard at work on the next episode of the show. As for the final word for this edition of Studio 5, we thought we'd give that to Torrin Wells. The Grammy-nominated singer shares why you should stop trying to find balance in life and instead, you should be looking for the rhythm.
On the mountains, I will bow my life. Yeah. In the valley,
if you think about balance, it's trying to find the center point of tension of two objects going the opposite direction or working against each other. So career and ministry would be opposites working against each other. Well, I just don't feel like that's right. My career and ministry should not be working against each other. My ministry and family should not be working against each other. They should be working with each other. We don't work in the numbers world, we work with rhythm. And every season of life has a rhythm. So you have to find the rhythm of the season that you're in, not just chase balance, because it'll be unending. But if you realize the stage and season that your life is in, your kids are in, your ministry are in, then you can actually find the rhythm in that. And there's not so much pressure to feel like you have to keep the pace of a previous season because now the season has changed.
God of the hills and valleys, and I am not alone.
Thanks, Torrin. With that, I will give up looking for balance and I will look to find the rhythm. That is a great final word for this edition of Studio 5. Until next time, be sure to connect with Studio 5 on Facebook and Instagram for uplifting entertainment news you will not find anywhere else. And you can always reach out and touch me at Ephraim Graham on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat. And of course, we invite you to come on back and see where Studio 5 takes you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.